The base shook like it was splitting apart. Mortars slammed into the courtyard. Fire tore across the motor pool. Smoke choked the air as alarms screamed. Incoming! Incoming! On the eastern wall, a machine gun lay silent. Its operator was down. The trench collapsing under fire. Dozens of enemy muzzles flashed from the ridges, closing in fast. And then through dust and chaos, one quiet soldier ran forward. She was the last person anyone expected to take the gun. But if she failed, over 100 lives would be lost in minutes. Who was she, and how did she turn the tide of the battle? Before we dive into this story, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The dust never really settled at Forward Operating Base Falcon Ridge. Every morning, boots scraped across gravel, metal clanged in the motor pool, and voices carried through the thin desert air. For most soldiers, the rhythm was routine. For Hannah Whitmore, it was different. Private first class. Hannah Whitmore worked in logistics. She counted crates, checked supply manifests, and kept track of ammunition. Reliable, yes, but invisible. In the barracks, her name rarely came up unless someone needed boxes moved or a form signed. She was small-framed, quiet, and easily overlooked in a platoon full of louder personalities. To them, she was not the type of soldier who carried the squad's heavy roar. That changed the day she asked for machine gun training. It was a simple request, delivered at formation, permission to qualify on the M240 Bravo. The silence lasted 1 second before the laughter erupted. 120 rounds a minute. That's not for you, Whitmore. One soldier jeered. Another slapped the receiver of the gun and grinned. This beast weighs 27 pounds before you even add ammo. You'd fall flat on your back. Even her squad leader, Staff Sergeant Walker, chuckled. You were born to count boxes, not pull triggers, Walker said. His tone wasn't cruel, just certain. The kind of certainty built on old prejudice. The barracks laughed, and the echo followed her long after lights out. Hannah didn't argue. She never raised her voice or tried to prove them wrong with words. Instead, she carried the memory of those smirks like a stone tucked deep in her rucksack. What none of them knew was that Hannah had been training for this doubt her entire life. She had grown up on a stretch of ranch land in West Texas, where the horizon seemed endless and the work never waited. Her father, a former Marine who had once carried the M60 in Iraq, believed in discipline more than comfort. He had placed a rifle in her hands when she was barely tall enough to hold it steady. Machines don't care about your size, he told her. They care about your mind and your heart. A gun is only as steady as the person behind it. Weekends became lessons reading Wind Through the Grass, slowing her breath, squeezing instead of yanking the trigger. Her father tested her constantly. He would clap behind her shoulder to rattle her focus. He would send tin cans swinging in the wind and demand she hit them anyway. The lesson was clear. A machine gun wasn't about brute force. It was about calm in chaos, control when the world screamed around you. Those memories stayed with her in Afghanistan. When others saw a quiet supply clerk, Hannah remembered a girl in dusty boots, holding steady while her father shouted distractions. It was her secret strength, carried in silence. At Falcon Ridge, silence was often her shield. When the barracks roared with jokes about firefights, she said little. When others bragged about muscles or marksmanship, she kept her eyes on the floor. But away from their laughter, Hannah carved her own path. She lifted weights in the dim gym, pushing until her arms shook. She snuck into the range on quiet nights, firing practice rounds when no one was watching. Every box lifted, every bead of sweat, every bruised shoulder was fuel. She wasn't waiting for approval. She was waiting for the moment when the desert would demand everything of her. Still, the laughter never fully left. One morning, the barracks echoed again with it. A group of soldiers joked over coffee, retelling the old story Whitmore asking for the M240. She'd last 2 minutes before it crushed her. One snorted, another shook his head. Hell, the ammo cans weigh half of her. Can you imagine Hannah walked past with her tray, eyes steady, lips pressed into a thin smile. She didn't reply. She didn't remind them that 6 weeks of silence had hardened her resolve. She simply sat at her table, ate her food, and kept her secret. Because Hannah Whitmore knew something the others didn't. She knew war had a way of exposing truth faster than talk ever could. And when that truth came, she would be ready. The desert has no patience for arrogance. It breaks the loud first, then tests the quiet. At Falcon Ridge, the test was coming. 6 weeks later, mortars would rain before dawn. The perimeter would buckle under fire, and the only person left standing at the machine gun would be the same quiet private they had mocked. But that morning in the barracks, all they saw was Hannah Whitmore, small, silent, smiling faintly as their laughter filled the air. They didn't know they were laughing at the soldier who would soon save them all. Dawn broke on July 19th with a pale haze over the Hindu Kush. The mountains loomed like jagged teeth, silent and unmoving. Then the ground shook, and silence shattered. The first mortar slammed into Falcon Ridge's courtyard. The blast tore through sandbags, sending fire and debris into the air. A second round hit the motor pool, erupting into a wall of flame. Radio traffic exploded across the base. All units, incoming defensive positions. Now voices cracked with urgency. Boots thundered across gravel. Hannah Whitmore was in the ammo shed when the world split open. Metal cans rattled around her, and shrapnel rattled off the walls. She burst out the door, lungs filling with smoke and dust. The scene outside was chaos. Soldiers sprawled in the dirt, some unmoving, others crying out. The acrid smell of burning fuel clawed at her throat. From the ridgeline, muzzle flashes flickered like lightning, dozens of them, overlapping arcs pinning the base from every angle. The enemy had prepared this strike for weeks. Hannah's eyes locked on the eastern trench. The M240 Bravo lay there, barrel braced on sandbags. Beside it, its operator writhed, blood pouring from his side. The gun was silent, its feed belt gleaming like a brass serpent. Rounds ready, mechanism intact, but no one was left to fire it. Her pulse hammered. This was the weapon she had begged to train on. This was her moment, staring back at her in the smoke. Static hissed in her headset. Whitmore's Sergeant Walker barked. Fall back to command. Leave that weapon. His voice carried the sharp edge of authority, laced with fear. She pressed her radio. If I don't fire, the East collapses. They'll pour straight through. Her words were flat, stripped of hesitation. Negative, Walker snapped. You're not qualified. You'll waste ammo. Hannah's jaw tightened. Her hand hovered over the receiver, heat rising in her chest. Another mortar detonated behind her, showering gravel. Fragments sliced the dirt where she knelt. She didn't wait for permission. She slung her M4 across her back. Then she broke cover, sprinting into the open. Bullets tore the ground at her feet, tracers hissing past her helmet. An RPG shrieked overhead, slamming into a bunker. The blast flung dirt across her face, but she kept running. Adrenaline drowned out fear, leaving only the pounding rhythm of survival. She dove into the trench, hitting hard beside the Bravo. Her fingers found the cool steel, heavy and familiar all at once. She braced the stock against her shoulder, eyes fixed on the ridgeline. Voices barked over radio channels, but she no longer listened. Her father's words echoed instead, heart over strength. Her breath slowed, finger tightening on the trigger. The weapon roared to life. The recoil slammed into her shoulder like a hammer. Muzzle flashes painted her face in strobe fire. Brass casings poured out, clattering around her boots. The belt rattled through the feed tray, each round a lifeline. She swept the barrel across the hillside. Enemy tracers winked out one by one. Machine gun nests that had been spitting death went silent. The ridge quivered under her relentless fire. Behind her, stunned soldiers lifted their heads. One whispered through the chaos, "It's Whitmore. She's on the gun." Another, eyes wide, muttered, "She's holding the whole East." But Hannah heard none of it. Her world narrowed to sight, trigger, and rhythm. She fired in short, disciplined bursts, just as she had trained in secret. Each pull of the trigger answered months of mockery. Each burst carved space for her comrades to breathe. The battlefield shifted, second by second, under her control. The east flank had been seconds from collapse. Now it thundered with the defiance of a single soldier, and for the first time the enemy faltered. The first wave came hard. Mortars screamed overhead, smashing into bunkers and tents. Heavy machine guns from the ridges poured fire down like a flood. The air turned into dust and shrapnel. Hannah pressed the M240 into her shoulder, knuckles white on the grip. She fired in bursts, sweeping arcs across the hillside. Targets flickered in the smoke, enemy barrels flashing from stone nests. She counted them by instinct. 12 strongholds spitting fire. Within 20 minutes, half of them had gone silent under her gun. But the ridge kept burning. Each nest she silenced. Another lit up, spitting tracers back. The ground trembled as mortars walked closer, searching for her trench. Her shoulders screamed with each recoil. The barrel glowed red, the stench of burned powder heavy. She swapped it fast, hands blistering from the heat. Then the second wave began. Shadows swarmed down the slope. More than 80 fighters charging at once. Their rifles flashed, their war cries echoing over the valley. Hannah set her jaw and opened fire. The M240 thundered, cutting swaths across the incline. The enemy scattered, but momentum pushed them forward. An RPG streaked toward her trench. She saw it too late. The blast tore sandbags into smoke and dirt. She ducked low, ears ringing, lungs choking, but she stayed on the gun. The ground shook again as more mortars landed nearby, but the eastern wall still held, anchored by her relentless fire. She pressed harder, bursts overlapping, keeping the slope littered with bodies. Her arms shook from strain. Every reload felt heavier, every belt harder to lock, but she refused to let the line falter. Then came the third wave. Not masses this time, snipers. Careful, patient, hunting for one exposed gunner. Rounds cracked past her head, snapping the air. One ricocheted off her helmet, ringing her skull. Blood trickled from her scalp, but her eyes stayed forward. She tore the hot barrel out again, palms bleeding as steel seared flesh. Her vision blurred, but she jammed in a new one. Another shot rang, a splinter of rock cutting her cheek. Through the scope of her iron sights, she spotted a glint on the ridge. She raked the position with fire, the sniper's perch exploding in dust. Silence followed where the glint had been. Radio chatter buzzed faintly. East sector holding. Somehow, another voice whispered, "It's Whitmore." She's still firing. Minutes bled into an hour, then two. The sun clawed higher, lighting the smoke-choked valley. Every muscle in her body begged her to stop, but she refused. A shadow crawled through the dirt toward her. Private Ellis, his face streaked with sweat and fear. He dragged 2 ammo cans across the open, tracers hissing overhead. He shoved them into her trench, chest heaving. "Take it," he gasped. "If you stop, we're finished." For the first time, Hannah looked up and met his eyes. This was the same Ellis who had laughed loudest weeks ago. Now he crouched beside her, trembling, relying on her fire. She nodded once, fed the belt, and unleashed another stream of lead. But exhaustion crept closer. Her hands cramped, vision dimmed, shoulders numb with pain. Once she slumped forward, nearly dropping the grip. In the haze, she saw her father, standing tall on the ranch field, shouting, "Steady your breath, hold your ground." The image jolted her upright, finger tightening again. The M240 roared once more, louder than her fatigue. Brass piled ankle high, barrels swapped again and again. Every heartbeat was paid for in steel and fire. Around her, wounded soldiers crawled to safety. Others lifted rifles, emboldened by the rhythm of her gun. The eastern wall lived because Hannah refused to fall. Inside the command post, maps blurred with red markers. Lieutenant Carter stared at the radio. voice low. Without Whitmore, Falcon Ridge would have been gone in the first hour, but the battle wasn't over. After nearly 4 hours, the enemy gathered for one last assault. They rose from the smoke in waves, charging with RPGs and rifles blazing. Hannah felt the last belt rattle through her hands. Her ammo was almost gone, the final line between survival and collapse. She braced, sighted, and opened fire. The barrels swept in deadly arcs. She cut across the slope, tearing holes through the charge. Men fell in clusters, their momentum breaking apart. Her weapon clicked dry. Belt finished. She grabbed the last box, slammed it in with shaking hands. 6 more minutes, that was all she could give. But 6 minutes was enough. Overhead, the thunder of jet engines split the sky. A-10s screamed into the valley, their cannons ripping the ridges apart. Explosions lit the mountainside, fireballs consuming the last push. The ground quaked as ordnance tore enemy lines into rubble. The charge collapsed, survivors scattering in panic. Hannah sagged against the sandbags, smoke curling around her. Her arms trembled, ears ringing, body near collapse. But the east wall still stood, and the base was alive. She had held the line for 4 hours in hell, and when the cavalry arrived, Falcon Ridge was still breathing, all because one soldier refused to let go of the gun. The valley fell silent at last. Only the hiss of smoke and the crackle of burning debris remained. Falcon Ridge was still standing, but it looked like a graveyard. Shattered walls lined the courtyard. Spent casings carpeted the ground in gold and black. The smell of fuel and blood hung thick in the air. Hannah Whitmore slumped behind the gun pit. Her shoulder was swollen purple, her hands slick with blood. Every breath rattled like broken glass. Medics rushed to her side, voices urgent. One bent to check her pulse, but she shook her head. "Check the others first," she whispered. "I'll live." They hesitated, but her eyes cut through the smoke. The command was clear, unshakable. The medic nodded and crawled toward the wounded sprawled in the dirt. Behind her trench, soldiers stared at the carnage. They saw the brass piled knee-high, barrels scattered from swaps. They knew no report could ever capture what had happened here. Rumors spread before nightfall. Whitmore held the east by herself. Someone said over the radio, by morning. The phrase carried through every corner of the base. Within days, the whispers hardened into fact. She had silenced 21 enemy nests. She had broken the charge of nearly a company. The casualty reports came back grim. 92 enemy dead, countless more wounded. On the American side, over 120 men and women alive because the east wall never fell. Inside the command bunker, officers reviewed the maps. Each marker told a story. Every sector bled except the east. Lieutenant Carter said it plainly. She saved the base. 6 weeks later, the desert sun blazed over Falcon Ridge. The garrison formed in rigid lines. Uniforms pressed, boots dusted. The ceremony was brief but heavy with weight. Captain Lewis stepped forward, a small box in hand. His voice carried, steady but strained. For valor beyond expectation, for holding the line when all seemed lost, Specialist Hannah Whitmore is awarded the Silver Star. He pinned the medal to her chest. The applause that followed was not loud. It was measured, solemn, almost reverent. At the back of formation, Sergeant Walker stood still. His eyes shone, jaw tight. No trace of mockery left. The man who once laughed now bowed his head. Hannah saluted, but her face remained calm. For her, medals were not the victory. Survival was. Word of her defense traveled beyond Falcon Ridge. It reached command, then headquarters, then the training schools back home. Her name became more than rumor, it became precedent. Orders came down, she would transfer to Fort Drum. There, she would join the heavy weapons school as an instructor, not just as a machine gunner, but as the first woman to teach the M240 course. New recruits arrived wide-eyed, some skeptical, some curious. Hannah didn't bother with long speeches. She simply placed the Bravo on the table. Her voice was even, quiet, carrying through the room. Strength isn't in muscle, it's in the will to keep firing when everything tells you to quit. The recruits leaned in, silent. She showed them the scars on her palms, the burn marks on her arms, evidence of a day when theory had no meaning, only survival. Every lesson came from the trench, not from a book. Her presence shifted the air in the classroom. The weapon that once symbolized mockery now stood as proof. Proof that no barrier, gender, size, expectation could outlast determination. Months later, stories of Falcon Ridge spread even further. Her stand joined the lineage of soldiers who had anchored impossible battles. Farmers at Lexington, nurses in World War II, defenders in forgotten valleys. Hannah Whitmore was now one of them. Not by choice, not by design, but by necessity. She had held the line because someone had to. At night, when the classrooms emptied, she sometimes lingered. She would run her hand across the steel receiver, the weapon quiet under her touch. Memories of fire and thunder returned, but so did the silence after. She never asked for statues or parades. She didn't need them. The lives still breathing were enough. The recruits who passed through her class carried her story with them, not as legend, but as a reminder. That courage is often quiet until the moment it roars. One morning, Hannah stood before another group of wide-eyed soldiers. She placed the weapon down, steady and deliberate. Her words cut through the silence. Power isn't in the gun. It's in the heart behind it. The room stayed still. No laughter this time. Only respect, heavy and unspoken. The camera would have pulled back then. The image, a small soldier in desert fatigues, hand resting on steel. The same woman once dismissed, now shaping the future. The war had tested her. The fire had scarred her. But out of the laughter and the smoke, Hannah Whitmore had risen. And at Fort Drum, in a quiet classroom, her legend began again.